In 2023, Mexico's largest airline put out a casting call for a commercial. The requirement was simple, and they said it openly. No dark-skinned people. This was not 1950. This was not the Jim Crow South. This was a major corporation in the 21st century, in a country that has spent 200 years insisting it doesn't see race. And for millions of dark-skinned Mexicans, it wasn't even shocking. It was just another Tuesday. If you're new here, welcome to Hidden Black Files. We tell the stories they buried, the history they rewrote, and the people they pretended never existed. Subscribe right now and hit the bell. What you're about to hear has been hidden in plain sight for over 2 centuries. In early 2022, a scandal broke in Mexico City. Several employees of an upscale steakhouse came forward with a damning allegation. The restaurant had a formal policy of seating customers by skin color. The best tables, the visible ones, the premium ones, were reserved for lighter-skinned guests. Darker-skinned patrons were moved elsewhere. Activists launched a boycott within days. The city opened an investigation. The restaurant denied everything. But here's the thing. The outrage wasn't because it was unbelievable. The outrage was because it had finally been said out loud. Because Mexico has a problem it has spent 2 centuries refusing to name. In a country of 127 million people, over 2.5 million citizens identify as Black or Afro-Mexican. And yet it was not until 2019 to 2019 that the Mexican federal constitution formally recognized them as a people at all. Think about what that means. Millions of human beings, living inside a country's borders, contributing to its culture, its economy, its history, rendered legally invisible by their own government. And that invisibility was not an accident. The numbers tell a story Mexico's government does not want to tell. If you are a dark-skinned Mexican, you will complete on average 6.5 years of schooling. Your light-skinned counterpart will complete 10. That is a 45% gap in educational achievement, not explained by geography alone, not explained by class alone, but by skin color. The income gap is just as stark. The average Mexican household earns around $193 a month. Dark-skinned citizens earn $137. A 41.5% penalty for the color of their skin. When researchers controlled for every variable, gender, age, region, ethnic origin, skin color still emerged as the single most powerful predictor of wealth and education in Mexico. And when Mexican police have encountered citizens whose skin was dark enough to make them doubt their nationality in documented cases, they have deported them. Not to Mexico City, not to a courthouse, to Haiti, to Honduras. Mexican citizens, deported from their own country, for being too Black to seem real. To understand how a nation arrives at this point, how it builds a system this complete, this deliberate, this invisible to itself, we have to go back to where it began. The year is 1519. Spanish conquistadors land on Mexico's shores. They bring 2 things that will permanently alter the country: an obsession with racial classification and enslaved Africans to work the land they are stealing. Among the very first conquistadors to help topple the Aztec Empire were 6 Black men. Their presence, like so much of Black Mexico's story, would be absorbed into the larger narrative and quietly forgotten. The Spanish colonial system was meticulous about race in a way that is almost difficult to comprehend today. They created what was called the Casta system, an elaborate hierarchy where skin color determined everything. What work you could do, where you could live, what clothes you were permitted to wear. At the top, pure-blooded Spaniards born in Spain, called peninsulares. Below them, their children born in Mexico, criollos. And at the bottom, indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans. But the Spanish didn't stop there. They became obsessed with documenting every possible racial mixture. They commissioned paintings of the categories: Spanish father, indigenous mother, mestizo, Spanish and African mulatto, a mulatto parent and a Spanish parent, morisco. The combinations multiplied into dozens of classifications, each with its own label, its own legal status, its own ceiling. And this system created an incentive that would echo through Mexican culture for centuries. Mejorando la raza, improving the race. Marrying someone lighter-skinned than yourself to move your children up the hierarchy. That phrase is still used in Mexico today. Between 1580 and 1650, nearly 250,000 Africans were forcibly brought to Mexico, primarily from Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Congo, Angola, and Mozambique. By the early 1600s, Mexico's African enslaved population was larger than anywhere else in Latin America. When Mexico counted its African population in 1810, they made up more than 10% of the entire country. Actual Spaniards made up less than 1%. These were not peripheral figures in Mexican history. They built it. They worked the silver mines. They ran the sugar plantations. They staffed the textile factories. In cities, they were skilled artisans, vendors, and craftspeople. So skilled that Spanish guilds, fearing competition, passed laws banning them from practicing prestigious trades like silk weaving. They brought agricultural knowledge, military expertise, and cultural traditions from some of the most sophisticated civilizations in the world. And they built New Spain on their backs while being denied any claim to it. But not everyone accepted their place in this system. His name was Gaspar Yanga. You will not find him in most Mexican textbooks. But his story is one of the most remarkable acts of resistance in the history of the Americas. And it is time you knew it. Yanga was an enslaved African, believed to be of royal lineage from Gabon, who arrived during the first wave of forced African migration to Mexico. Against the full weight of Spanish colonial power, he led an uprising of enslaved people into the mountainous regions of Veracruz. This was not a desperate escape. It was an organized rebellion, a direct assault on the colonial system itself. The rebels became known as Cimarrones, and the communities they built in the mountains were called Palenques, free settlements hidden in terrain the Spanish found almost impossible to navigate. But these weren't just hiding places. They were functioning societies. Using agricultural knowledge brought from West and Central Africa, the Cimarrones established sustainable food supplies. Their military experience, drawn from cultures with centuries of sophisticated warfare, allowed them to defend their settlements and conduct strategic raids on Spanish caravans traveling between Veracruz and Mexico City. The raids were not random. They targeted goods and supplies while simultaneously helping other enslaved people escape. The Spanish merchants grew so afraid of the region they began avoiding it entirely, costing the colonial government significant revenue. For nearly 4 decades, the Spanish sent military expeditions into those mountains. Each time, Yanga's people used their knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver them. By 1609, the Spanish colonial authorities were forced to do something they had never done before. They negotiated with people they legally considered property. If this history is hitting you the way it should, take a moment right now to support the channel. Subscribe, hit like, share this video. Every action you take helps these stories reach the people who were never taught them. We'll be right here. Yanga's demands were extraordinary in their clarity. He did not ask for small concessions. He secured guarantees of self-governance, the right to bear arms, and legal protection from re-enslavement. The settlement would pay tribute to the Spanish crown, but in exchange, it would govern its own internal affairs. The settlement was named San Lorenzo de los Negros, the first legally recognized free black settlement in the Americas. It was later renamed Yanga in 1932 in his honor. The town still exists in Veracruz today, but Yanga's greatest legacy was not the town. It was the proof that resistance could succeed, proof that enslaved people could force their oppressors to the negotiating table. The settlement inspired Palenques across Mexico, centers of African cultural preservation where languages, religious practices, and social customs that would have been erased in the cities were kept alive. Yanga demonstrated something the colonial system was built to deny, that black people were not just laborers or property, but political actors capable of reshaping the world around them. And that is precisely why Mexico decided to forget him. The year is 1810. Mexico has just won its independence after 3 centuries of Spanish rule. The new leaders inherit a nation fractured by the Casta system, a society where skin color has determined every aspect of life for 300 years. The enslaved and formerly enslaved African population makes up over 10% of the country. The Spanish they just expelled make up less than 1%. The new leaders face a choice. They can reckon honestly with what colonialism built, or they can bury it beneath a new national story. They choose burial. José María Morelos abolishes slavery and the Casta system, declaring all citizens simply Mexican. On the surface, progress. In practice, a sleight of hand. By declaring everyone equal, they create a myth of colorblindness that will be used for the next 2 centuries to deny that inequality exists at all. But the true architect of Mexico's racial erasure comes later. In the 1920s, philosopher José Vasconcelos develops his theory of la raza cósmica, the cosmic race. His vision: Mexico will transcend race by blending everyone together into a new, superior humanity. It sounds progressive. It is not. In Vasconcelos's cosmic race, European features are the ideal. Indigenous traits are tolerated as part of the mixture. But African features, those are meant to disappear. Absorbed. Eliminated through what he called voluntary extinction. He did not hide this. He wrote it. He published it. And it became official government policy. The post-revolutionary Mexican state embraced mestizaje, the idea that Mexico was a nation of mixed people. But the mixing was never meant to celebrate blackness. It was meant to erase it. Whiten the population, generation by generation, until the African roots were gone. Mejorando la raza. Improving the race. The policy ran through every institution. History textbooks were rewritten to minimize or omit the African presence entirely. Leaders of African descent, including independence heroes like Vicente Guerrero, Mexico's second president, were quietly stripped of their racial identity in the official record. And then the census simply stopped counting black people. The last official count had been 1810. After independence, nothing. Black Mexicans were often forced to identify as indigenous, even when their cultural roots were entirely different. The erasure was so complete that by the late 20th century, many Mexicans genuinely believed there were no black people in their country. Some Afro-Mexicans didn't know their own history, describing themselves as strange indigenous people because of their hair and skin, having no framework to understand what they actually were. The deliberate denial ran so deep that Mexican immigration officials would detain and deport their own black citizens because they could not believe that black people could be Mexican. The fight back came slowly, and it came from the ground up. It was not until 2015 that Mexico allowed people to identify as Afro-Mexican in a national survey, the first official recognition of their existence in over 2 centuries. Approximately 1.4 million Mexicans identified as having African ancestry. Activists believe the true number is far higher because centuries of erasure have conditioned many black Mexicans to hide what they are. In 1997, an organization called Mexico Negro began fighting for official recognition of Afro-Mexican identity. Their first annual meeting of black towns marked the beginning of an organized movement that would take more than 20 years to win its first major victory. That victory came in 2019, when the Mexican federal constitution was amended to formally recognize Afro-Mexicans as a people. 209 years after independence, recognition is a beginning. It is not an end. Today, black activists in Mexico are fighting not just against discrimination, but against the machinery of erasure itself. They are pushing for representation in media, in politics, in education. They are demanding that Yanga's name be taught in schools, that Vicente Guerrero's blackness be acknowledged, not erased. that the Palenques and Cimarrones be restored to their rightful place in the national story. In 2010, Mexico's own Anti-Discrimination Council, the agency specifically tasked with fighting discrimination, conducted a national survey on discrimination and did not mention Afro-Mexicans once. Not once. A government body, whose entire purpose is to see discrimination, looked directly at Black Mexicans and saw nothing. That is not oversight. That is the system working exactly as designed. You cannot solve racism by pretending race doesn't exist. You cannot honor a people by making them invisible. And you cannot build a true national identity on the foundation of a lie, no matter how many generations you repeat it, no matter how thoroughly you rewrite the textbooks, no matter how many censuses you conduct without counting the people who are standing right in front of you. Mexico's African roots did not disappear. They were hidden. And the people who hid them knew exactly what they were doing. Gaspar Yanga built the first free Black settlement in the Americas. Afro-Mexican farmers shaped the country's agriculture. Black artisans built its cities. Black soldiers fought for its independence. They were there from the beginning, and it is long past time their country admitted it. If this video opened your eyes to a history you were never taught, that is exactly why Hidden Black Files exists. Subscribe to the channel. Share this video. Leave a comment below and tell us, what part of this history were you never taught? What name, what story should more people know? These stories were buried deliberately. Every time you watch, share, and engage, you help dig them back up. Subscribe to Hidden Black Files. Be part of keeping this history alive.